I bet he couldn't even find the ignition. Kendrick Shaw, executive assistant to the CEO, smirked as he gestured toward the janitor cleaning the scuff marks near the helipad's edge. Go on, Sloan. Ask him. It'll be funny. Sloan Davenport, CEO of Davenport Industries, allowed a rare, amused smile to cross her lips. It had been a long day of brutal negotiations, and a moment of levity was welcome. The janitor, a quiet man in his late 30s with tired eyes, seemed completely oblivious, focused only on his work. You think so? Sloan asked, playing along. I'll bet you $1,000 he doesn't know the first thing about a Bell 429, Kendrick whispered conspiratorially. All right, Sloan said, her voice carrying across the windy rooftop. She walked toward the janitor. You! She called out. The man looked up, startled. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at her personal helicopter, its blades gleaming in the afternoon sun. My assistant and I have a little wager. If you can fly this helicopter, I'll marry you. The man stared at her, then at the chopper, his expression unreadable. Kendrick snickered behind her. The janitor wiped his hands on a rag, walked past her without a word, and opened the pilot's side door. Sloan's smile faltered. She exchanged a look with Kendrick, who simply shrugged, his own amusement growing. This was better than he'd hoped. The man would sit in the seat, push a few random buttons, and then get out, defeated. It would be a perfect little story to tell at the bar later. But the janitor didn't just sit. His movements were fluid, economical, and unnervingly familiar. He strapped himself in with the practiced ease of someone who had done it thousands of times. His hands moved across the console, not with the fumbling curiosity of a novice, but with the precise touch of a surgeon. A sequence of switches was flipped. A low whine began to build from the engine, a sound Sloan knew intimately. What is he doing? She murmured, her amusement evaporating and being replaced by a sharp, cold spike of alarm. He's bluffing, Kendrick said, though his voice now held a sliver of uncertainty. There's no way. The whine of the turbine intensified, pitching higher and higher until it became a deafening roar. The main rotor began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, blurring into a transparent disk above them. The wind from the blades whipped Sloan's hair across her face and forced Kendrick to take a step back. This wasn't a bluff. Before Sloan could shout, before she could order him to stop, the helicopter lifted. There was no lurch, no wobble, just a perfectly smooth, vertical ascent of about 20 feet. It hung there for a moment, impossibly still, as if tethered to the sky by an invisible thread. Then, it tilted forward and executed a flawless pirouette, the nose of the aircraft dipping in a gesture that felt almost like a bow. Kendrick's jaw was hanging open. Sloan stood frozen, her mind struggling to reconcile the man who cleaned her office floors with the pilot executing a maneuver that her own highly paid aviator would have called showboating. The helicopter then banked sharply, zipping out over the city skyline for a breathtaking moment before returning to hover directly over the helipad. With the same unnerving grace, it descended, touching down so gently that the landing skids barely made a sound. The engine began to spool down. The blades slowed. Silence, heavy and absolute, returned to the rooftop. The pilot's door opened and the janitor stepped out. He closed the door with a soft click, walked back to his cart, picked up his spray bottle, and resumed scrubbing the scuff mark on the floor. He didn't look at them. He didn't say a word. It was as if the last 90 seconds had never happened. Sloan found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. Who are you? The janitor, Owen Grant, finally looked up. His eyes were calm, but there was a deep, unyielding wall behind them. Just the janitor, ma'am. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Have a good evening. He pushed his cart toward the rooftop exit, the squeak of its wheels the only sound. Wait! Sloan called out, taking a step after him. But he was already gone, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind him. Kendrick finally snapped out of his stupor. That was impossible, he stammered, Who was that guy? Did you know he could do that? No, Kendrick, I did not, Sloane said, her mind racing. She ran a multi-billion-dollar corporation. She vetted everyone, from her board members to her chefs. Surprises were liabilities, and she did not tolerate liabilities. Yet, a man with the skills of an elite pilot was pushing a mop through her headquarters, and she knew nothing about him. Why? Who was he hiding from? Her phone buzzed, dragging her back to reality. It was a message from the board's chairman. Tokyo is getting cold feet. The deal is on life support. Fix it. Sloane's jaw tightened. The deal with Tanaka Corp was everything. It would secure their dominance in the market for the next decade. Its collapse would be catastrophic, and Kendrick's reports had assured her everything was on track. She looked at the helicopter, then at the door where the janitor had disappeared. Two impossible problems had just landed on her desk in the same afternoon, and for the first time in a very long time, Sloane Davenport had no idea which one to solve first. Sloane stormed back into her penthouse office, the roar of the helicopter's blades still echoing in her ears. "Get me everything we have on Owen Grant," she snapped, her voice tight with an unfamiliar mix of anger and raw curiosity. "Employee file, background check, security clearance, coffee preferences, everything." Now Kendrick, still looking a little pale, hurried to his terminal. "Right away, Sloane." A few frantic keystrokes later, a file appeared on the large monitor on her wall. It was almost completely useless. Owen Grant had been hired 8 months ago. His application was sparse. Address in a working-class neighborhood across town. Previous employment listed as self-employed, logistics, and transport. No references. His background check had come back clean. No criminal record, no credit issues, nothing. He was, on paper, a ghost, a model employee with a perfect attendance record who had never caused a single issue. There was no mention of military service, no flight school, no connection to aviation whatsoever. "This is it?" Sloane asked, her voice dangerously low. "This is all we have on a man who can fly a $9 million aircraft like it's an extension of his own body. The agency we use is the best in the business," Kendrick said defensively. If there was something to find, they would have found it. Maybe he was a hobbyist? Some guys are just naturally gifted. Sloane shot him a look that could curdle milk. Naturally gifted doesn't cover a 0G pirouette 50 stories above downtown. He's a professional, and he's hiding. Find out why she turned her attention to the more pressing fire. And while you're at it, explain to me why I'm getting panicked texts from the chairman about Tokyo, when you told me yesterday that Tanaka was all but signed. Kendrick's professional mask slid perfectly back into place. He straightened his tie, his expression a careful blend of concern and calm competence. "It's a minor snag, Sloane. A cultural misstep. Tanaka-san felt our final offer was too aggressive. He prefers a more delicate approach. I'm already drafting a new proposal, something that shows more deference. I've left a message for his chief of staff. I assure you, it's under control." His explanation was smooth, logical, and infuriating. It made her feel like she was overreacting, yet a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. "Under control? Kendrick, this is a $50 billion deal. We don't have minor snags, and we won't," he said, his voice a soothing balm. "Let me handle the Japanese. You've got enough on your plate. I'll smooth it over. It's what you pay me for." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Fine, handle it. But if I get one more text like that, you'll be handling your severance package." Hours later, Owen Grant pushed open the door to his small apartment. The stale air of the hallway was instantly replaced by the smell of cinnamon and warm laundry. "Daddy!" A small girl with bright, curious eyes and a mop of unruly brown hair launched herself at him from the couch. Owen dropped his worn backpack and scooped her up in a hug that seemed to melt the tension from his shoulders. "Hey, Firefly," he murmured into her hair. "How was your day with Mrs. Gable?" "It was okay," Maya said, pulling back to look at him seriously. We finished the volcano for my science project. It has extra baking soda for a super eruption, but Mrs. Gable smells like mothballs. Owen laughed, a genuine warm sound that would have been unrecognizable to anyone at Davenport Industries. Well, don't tell her that. Did you get your homework done? All of it, she said proudly. And I practiced my spelling words. Even pterodactyl. You're getting too smart for me, he said, setting her down. Go get washed up for dinner. I'm making the tacos you like. As she scampered off, Owen glanced around the small, meticulously clean apartment. Every piece of furniture was second-hand but well cared for. Maya's colorful drawings were taped to the walls, a vibrant contrast to the building's drab beige paint. On a small, cluttered desk in the corner sat a framed photo of a woman with a smile as bright as Maya's, her arm draped around a younger, happier-looking Owen in a flight suit. This was his world. It wasn't a skyscraper or a boardroom. It was a 2-bedroom apartment where the only thing that mattered was keeping his daughter safe, happy, and far away from the life he'd left behind. The rooftop had been a mistake, a stupid, reckless impulse. He had let his guard down for a moment, and now he could only hope the consequences wouldn't follow him home. He had a feeling, however, that a woman like Sloane Davenport didn't just let things go. Back in her sterile, glass-walled office, Sloane stared out at the sprawling city lights, the half-eaten salad on her desk forgotten. She couldn't shake the image of the janitor's hands on the controls. Steady, confident, sure. She had built an empire on the ability to read people, to dissect their motivations and weaknesses in a single meeting. But Owen Grant was a locked room with no key. She'd had Kendrick check on her personal pilot, Gavin. The story was that his son had a sudden, severe case of pneumonia and had been rushed to the hospital. It was plausible, but the timing felt too convenient. Another piece of a puzzle she couldn't see. Frustrated, she packed her briefcase and headed for the private elevator. The day was over, but as she exited the building onto the street, her driver holding the limo door open, she saw him. Across the street, standing under the dim orange glow of a bus stop, was Owen Grant. He wasn't looking at the traffic. He was staring down at his phone, a small, sad smile on his face. Sloane stopped, her hand on the car door. For a second, she considered walking over there, demanding answers. But what would she say? Why are you lying about who you are? What right did she have to ask? The bus pulled up, its brakes hissing. Owen put his phone away and got on, disappearing into the crowd of tired commuters. Sloane watched until the bus's red taillights vanished around a corner. She got into her car. Just drive, she told her driver, her voice flat. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't rely on background checks or employee files. If she wanted to know who Owen Grant was, she was going to have to find out for herself. The next morning, Sloane arrived at the office with a new resolve. The direct approach had failed. The official channels were a dead end. If she wanted to understand the enigma that was Owen Grant, she would have to change the rules of the game. Her opportunity was waiting in her inbox under the subject line. Reminder, Davenport Day Annual Picnic this Saturday. Every year, the company hosted a massive, mandatory fun day for its employees and their families. It was a carefully orchestrated PR move, meant to foster a sense of community. Sloane despised it. She usually made a brief 20-minute appearance, shook a few hands, and left. It was an inefficient use of a Saturday. But this year, it was the perfect observation deck. It was a neutral ground where the janitor and the CEO could, for a few hours, simply be people. She RSVP'd attending for the entire day. Good morning, Sloane, Kendrick said, gliding into her office with a tablet. I've got good news. I just had a productive preliminary call with Tanaka-san's number 2. I think I've found a way to salvage the deal. Sloane raised an eyebrow. Already? They felt we were undervaluing their proprietary distribution network. So I drafted a memo of understanding that gives them a slightly larger stake in the joint venture's logistics arm. He explained, his presentation flawless. It'll cut into our profit margin by a fraction of a % in the short term, but it's a sign of goodwill. It's the delicate approach they wanted. I think if you sign off, we can get them back to the table by Monday. Sloan scanned the document. On the surface, it seemed like a reasonable concession, but something felt off. Giving up even a fraction of control in logistics, the backbone of their global operation, was a significant strategic shift. It felt less like a compromise and more like a surrender. This is a big move, Kendrick. It sets a dangerous precedent. It's a bigger move to lose the deal entirely, he countered smoothly. This is a quick, decisive fix. It shows strength through flexibility. They'll see it as a mark of respect. The pressure from the board was immense. The clock was ticking. Against her better judgment, Sloan nodded. Fine. Send it. But Kendrick, if this backfires, it's on you. Don't worry, Sloan, he said with a confident smile. I've got your back. The day of the picnic was aggressively cheerful. The sprawling corporate park was filled with bouncy castles, food trucks, and hundreds of employees attempting to relax under the watchful eye of senior management. Sloan felt deeply out of place in her tailored linen trousers and silk blouse. She found them near the small lake at the edge of the park. Owen wasn't with the other maintenance workers, who had formed a tight circle around a barbecue grill. Instead, he was sitting on a checkered blanket with his daughter, helping her meticulously construct a small boat out of a leaf and a twig. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, and without the janitor's uniform, he looked different. Younger, more relaxed, but with a persistent watchfulness in his eyes. Sloan took a breath and approached. Grant! Owen looked up, and for a split second, a guarded, almost hostile look crossed his face before being replaced by bland neutrality. Ma'am, this is your daughter? Sloan asked, gesturing awkwardly toward Maya. This is Maya, Owen said, his hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. Maya looked Sloan up and down with the unfiltered honesty of an 8-year-old. Your face is so serious, she declared. Are you mad about the grass? Sloan blinked. No, I'm not mad about the grass. Okay, Maya said, apparently satisfied. She held up her creation. Look, it's a boat. It's for the Frog King. It's a very structurally sound boat, Sloan offered, feeling ridiculous. Owen's lips twitched in a ghost of a smile. She's the chief naval architect. The conversation stalled. The silence was thick with the unspoken power dynamic between them. Sloan was about to retreat, to chalk the whole thing up to a bad idea, when a high-pitched buzzing sound filled the air. One of the marketing VPs was showing off a new high-end drone, making it perform swoops and dives over the lake. As the drone zipped past their blanket, Owen's reaction was instantaneous and subtle. His posture stiffened. His eyes tracked the drone not with casual interest, but with the focused, analytical gaze of a predator. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders, as if bracing for a sound he expected to follow the buzz. The relaxed father was gone, and in his place was someone else entirely. Someone harder, colder, and far more dangerous. Sloan saw it. The mask had slipped, just for a second, but it was enough. The moment passed. The drone flew away. Owen visibly forced his shoulders to relax, turning his attention back to Maya, but the shift had been undeniable. Daddy, can we get ice cream? Maya asked, oblivious to the silent drama. Sure, Firefly, Owen said, his voice a little too tight. He stood up and looked at Sloan. If you'll excuse us, ma'am. He took Maya's hand and walked away, melting into the crowd. Sloan stood rooted to the spot, the drone's buzz still ringing in her ears. He wasn't just a pilot. That reaction wasn't from a hobbyist. It was instinct. It was training. It was the reaction of a man who had seen things like that in a very different context, a place where that buzzing was followed by something else. From across the lawn, Kendrick watched Sloan staring after the janitor. He saw the look on her face, the confusion, the dawning respect, the fascination. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. The CEO is distracted. Accelerate the timeline. I want the board to see the Q3 projections by Monday morning. The ones we discussed. He put his phone away, a predatory smile touching his lips. Sloane thought she was playing some clever game, trying to unravel a mystery. She had no idea she was just a pawn in his. The Monday morning after the picnic felt different. The air in Sloane's office was thin and sharp. The mystery of Owen Grant had burrowed into her mind, a puzzle she kept turning over and over. The man who comforted his daughter over a leaf boat was the same man who reacted to a toy drone with the instincts of a trained soldier. The two images didn't fit, and Sloane hated things that didn't fit. Her thoughts were interrupted by Kendrick sweeping into her office, his face a perfect mask of grave concern. He was holding a tablet displaying a flurry of emails from Tokyo. "It's worse than I thought," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Tanaka-san's board is interpreting our revised offer as a sign of weakness. They're calling it a desperate move." Sloane's blood ran cold. She snatched the tablet and read the latest message. The respectful tone from last week was gone. It was replaced by a list of new, non-negotiable demands. They wanted a larger stake, a lower acquisition price, and 2 seats on the North American board. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender document. "They're gutting us," Sloane breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "They're using our own concession as leverage to bleed us dry." "I don't understand how this could have happened," Kendrick said, shaking his head in feigned disbelief. "My contacts assured me this was the right play. It's almost as if someone tipped them off that we were more desperate than we let on." The implication hung in the air. That Sloane's leadership was weak. That the company was vulnerable under her command. The chairman called 2 minutes later. His voice was glacial. The board was convening an emergency session on Friday. She had until then to either fix the Tanaka deal or present a viable alternative. If she couldn't, they would be forced to explore new leadership options. The threat was clear. She was on the verge of losing her father's company. For the next hour, Sloane was a whirlwind of controlled fury. She called her legal team, her CFO, her head of strategy. They all said the same thing. Tanaka had them backed into a corner. To fight back would be to risk a hostile takeover attempt. To acquiesce would be corporate suicide. She was trapped. Defeated, she walked to the vast window of her office, which overlooked the helipad. The helicopter sat there, silent and gleaming. A monument to a power she suddenly felt she no longer had. She thought of the janitor, of the calm certainty in his hands as he'd mastered the machine. He wasn't trapped. He was free. An idea, wild and desperate, began to form in her mind. It was insane. It was a long shot. But it was the only move on the board she had left that wasn't defensive. That night she found him on the 48th floor, methodically cleaning the glass walls of a deserted conference room. The rhythmic squeak of his squeegee was the only sound. "Grant," she said, her voice echoing in the empty space. He stopped, turning slowly. There was no surprise in his eyes. It was as if he'd been expecting her. "Ma'am, I'm not here to talk about your job," she said, getting straight to the point. "I'm here to talk about your other one." His expression didn't change. "I only have one job." "Stop it," she snapped, her patience gone. "I saw you at the picnic." "Your reaction to that drone. My head of security is a former Marine. He flinches at car backfires. You flinched at a toy. That isn't a hobby, Grant. That's muscle memory. The kind you don't get at a weekend flight school. The kind you get when that sound is followed by gunfire." He remained silent, his face a stoic mask. "The Tanaka deal is collapsing," she said, deciding to lay all her cards on the table. "I have one chance to save it. There's a man, a former associate of my father's named Kenji Ito. He's a recluse, but he has Tanaka's ear. If I can speak to him, face to face, I can salvage this. But he lives on a private island off the coast of British Columbia. It's accessible only by helicopter, and there's a storm system moving in. Commercial flights are being grounded." She took a breath. "My pilot, Gavin, is still out. His son took a turn for the worse. I need a pilot, Someone who can handle rough weather and who doesn't exist on any official flight logs. I need you. Owen picked up his bucket and started toward the door. You're mistaken, ma'am. I'm a janitor. I can't help you. Everyone has a price, Sloane said, her voice hardening. Not me, he replied without looking back. What about your daughter? He froze, his hand on the door frame. He turned, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of fire in his tired eyes. You leave her out of this. I can't, Sloane said, pressing her advantage, hating herself for it, but seeing no other way. I know you spend a third of your salary on the copay for her medication. I know your insurance plan has a lifetime cap that you're getting dangerously close to. And I know you watch her every time she breathes, terrified it might be the one that hitches. His face paled. The stoic mask crumbled, revealing a raw, profound fear. This isn't a request anymore, Owen, she said, using his first name for the first time. It's an offer. One flight. You get me to Ito and back, and I will set up a private, irrevocable trust in Maya's name. It will cover all of her medical expenses, every doctor, every treatment, every prescription, for the rest of her life. It will also pay for her entire education, through to any graduate school she chooses. She will never have to worry about a single bill. Ever again. She let the words sink into the silence. She was offering him the one thing his quiet, invisible life couldn't give him. Absolute security for his child. He stood there, motionless, caught between the ghosts he was running from, and the future he so desperately wanted for his daughter. His hands, the same hands that had so expertly commanded a multi-million-dollar machine, were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. The silence in the conference room stretched for a lifetime. Owen's jaw was a hard line, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Sloane, somewhere deep in his past. She could almost see the war raging behind his eyes, the instinct to run versus the fierce, primal need to protect his child. Finally he spoke, and his voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a soldier accepting a mission. Fine, he said, I'll do it. But we have terms. Sloane nodded, keeping her expression neutral. I'm listening. First, the trust is to be drawn up by my lawyer, not yours. It will be funded in full, and the transfer confirmed before we take off. Second, this is a one-time contract for transportation services. You will not ask me about my past, my training, or my family. I am not your employee. I am a contractor. Third, when we land back here, the contract is terminated. You and I go back to what we were. You don't know me, and I don't know you. Understood? Understood, Sloane said without hesitation. The terms were harsh, but they were a small price to pay. We fly tonight, Owen stated, not asked. The storm front will be at its worst around 0300. I want to be through it before then. Have the helicopter fully fueled and ready for a pre-flight inspection in 1 hour. I want updated meteorological charts, satellite imagery of the flight path, and the island's landing coordinates. And I want them on a private, air-gapped tablet. Nothing connected to your company's network. He was no longer a janitor. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. He was a commander, his every word precise, and filled with an authority that Sloane hadn't seen from anyone in her company, herself included. She simply nodded again. I'll make the arrangements. As Owen walked away to make a call to his lawyer and arrange for Maya's care, Sloane felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. She had just handed over control of her life's most critical mission to a man whose last name she barely knew. Downstairs, Kendrick watched the activity with a growing sense of unease. A flurry of encrypted emails from Sloane's personal account. A call to the airfield hangar, ordering her personal helicopter prepped and fueled for an unscheduled midnight flight. It made no sense. Gavin, her pilot, was out. Who was she flying with? He walked past the janitor's supply closet on his way to the executive garage and saw Owen Grant inside, not cleaning, but packing a small, military-style go-bag with a quiet, focused intensity. Kendrick slowed, his eyes narrowing. It couldn't be. The rooftop incident was a fluke, a party trick. He pulled out his phone and made a call to a contact in the airfield's control tower. "I need you to keep an eye on the transponder for N429SD, he said, reciting the helicopter's tail number. "Let me know its flight plan the second it's filed, and who's listed as the pilot." An hour later, Sloan met Owen on the rooftop. He had changed into dark functional cargo pants and a worn leather jacket. He ignored her completely, heading straight for the helicopter. For the next 20 minutes, he moved around the aircraft with a flashlight, checking rotors, fluid lines, and avionics with a meticulousness that bordered on obsessive. He was in a different world, a world of checklists and fail-safes. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. "It'll fly." He gestured for the tablet, and she handed it to him. He studied the weather patterns, his face grim. "It's going to be rough. Once you're in, you don't get out until I say so. You listen to my every command without question. Is that clear?" "Crystal," Sloan replied, strapping herself into the co-pilot's seat. The takeoff was even more impressive than the first time. There was no showmanship now, only raw efficiency. The helicopter lifted into the turbulent night sky and banked sharply, heading northwest over the dark, sprawling city. For the first hour, they flew in silence, the rhythmic thrum of the rotors filling the small cockpit. Below them, the city lights gave way to the black expanse of the wilderness. "Why?" Sloan finally asked, unable to bear the silence. Owen's eyes remained fixed on the instruments. "We had a deal, Ms. Davenport, no questions." "That wasn't a question about your past," she countered. "It was about your present. Why this? Why push a mop when you can do this?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because this," he said, his voice a low growl, "gets people killed. Pushing a mop doesn't." Before she could respond, the helicopter jolted violently. A wall of black clouds, invisible moments before, loomed ahead of them. Rain began to lash against the windshield, thick and furious. The aircraft dropped suddenly, and Sloane's stomach leaped into her throat. She gripped the edge of her seat, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. A small, involuntary gasp escaped her lips. Owen's head snapped toward her. The hard, distant look in his eyes was replaced by something else. It was the calm, focused gaze of a protector. "Hey," he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the roar of the storm. It was steady, reassuring. "Look at me. I've got you. Just breathe. This is just weather. I've flown in worse." She met his eyes, and in their depths, she saw an absolute certainty that defied the chaos raging around them. He wasn't just a pilot. He was a lifeline. And as the storm tossed their tiny aircraft through the inky blackness, thousands of feet above the earth, Sloan realized she had placed her life, her company, and her entire future in the hands of a complete stranger. And stranger still, she trusted him. The helicopter bucked and dropped, a sickening lurch that felt like a free fall. Alarms blared in the cockpit, a high-pitched symphony of disaster. Sloane's knuckles were white where she gripped her seat. Outside the cockpit window, there was nothing but a swirling, violent blackness, pierced intermittently by flashes of lightning that illuminated the torrential rain. "Crosswinds are hitting 80 knots. Owen's voice was tense, but impossibly calm, cutting through the chaos. "It's trying to push us into the mountainside. I have to take us down, find a layer of stable air." He pushed the cyclic forward, a controlled dive that felt anything but. The rain hammered against the glass, and the wind howled like a living thing. Sloan watched his hands as they moved across the controls, a blur of constant, minute adjustments. He wasn't just flying the helicopter. He was wrestling with the storm, anticipating every gust, countering every downdraft. He was a part of the machine. "There," he said, his eyes darting between the instruments and the void outside. "Below this sheer. Hold on." He brought the helicopter into a sharp banking turn that pressed Sloan deep into her seat. For a terrifying moment, they were flying sideways, before Owen leveled out. The violent shaking lessened, the alarms fell silent. While the storm still raged around them, the air here was smoother, the aircraft stable. They had punched through the worst of it. Sloane let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. "How did you do that?" "I fly the plane," he said, his focus still absolute. "Not the weather." 20 minutes later, a small, flickering light appeared through the rain. A remote island, rugged and battered by the sea. Owen circled it once, his eyes scanning the terrain, before beginning his descent toward a small, wind-swept landing pad carved out of the rock. He set the helicopter down with a final, gentle bump. The moment the engine spooled down, the cockpit was plunged into a profound silence, broken only by the sound of the wind and rain. "We're here," Owen said, his voice flat again. The pilot receding, the contractor returning. An old man in a waterproof coat was waiting for them, holding a powerful lantern. This was Kenji Ito, his face a roadmap of hard-won wisdom, his eyes sharp and discerning. He led them into a simple, elegant house filled with books and the scent of cedar. He listened to Sloane's pitch for a full hour without saying a word, his hands folded around a cup of steaming tea. Sloane was brilliant. She laid out the data, the projections, the mutual benefits of a restructured deal with Tanaka. It was a masterful corporate argument, and it was failing. "You speak of profits and margins, Miss Davenport," Ito said when she had finished, his voice a low rumble. "These are temporary things. My friend Tanaka values loyalty. He believes you have shown none. He believes your company has lost its spirit, its soul. Your numbers will not convince him." Sloane's face fell. She had come all this way for nothing. Desperation clawed at her. Ito's gaze shifted from her to Owen, who had been standing silently by the door, a stoic shadow. "And you?" Ito asked, his voice sharp. "You are her pilot? You flew through this storm?" Owen simply nodded. "Yes, sir. You must have great faith in her plan to risk your life for it," Ito observed. Owen's jaw tightened. He glanced at Sloane, then back at the old man. He knew he was supposed to stay silent, that this was not his business. But Sloane's face, pale and defeated, stirred something in him. He thought of Maya, of the promise of her future. He had a debt to pay. "Sir," Owen said, his voice quiet but firm, "I don't know anything about her plan. But I've been in situations where the plan falls apart in the first 5 minutes. When that happens, you don't trust the plan. You trust the person flying next to you." The room fell silent. Ito stared at Owen, a long, appraising look. He saw the janitor, the pilot, and the soldier all in one. He saw a man who understood things that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. He then looked at Sloane, truly looked at her, and saw not just a ruthless CEO, but a leader who had inspired that kind of trust in the man she'd hired. A slow smile spread across Ito's face. "I see," he said. He reached for an old rotary phone. "I will make the call." Back at Davenport Industries, Kendrick Shaw paced his office like a caged wolf. His contact at the airfield had confirmed the impossible. The flight plan was filed under a shell corp, and the pilot was listed as a John Doe. But the man who boarded the helicopter with Sloane was the janitor. Sloane's reckless gamble might actually pay off. Kendrick couldn't let that happen. His own carefully laid plans were about to come to fruition. He picked up his phone. "It's me," he said to the person on the other end. "She's gone rogue. An unsanctioned, off-the-books trip. We can't wait until Friday. Frame it as a mental health crisis, a breakdown from the pressure. Leak the flight details to the board. I want an emergency vote called for 8 a.m. tomorrow." It's time to remove her. Relief washed over Sloane in a dizzying wave as they lifted off from the island. Ito had made the call. Tanaka had agreed to stand down and reopen honest negotiations. She had done it. She had saved the company. "Thank you, Owen," she said, her voice filled with a genuine gratitude that surprised even her. "I couldn't have—" Her phone buzzed, vibrating against the console. A single automated email had pushed through the satellite connection. She opened it. Subject: Mandatory Emergency Board Meeting. 8 a.m. Her blood turned to ice. She read the first line of the attached memo, drafted by the board's vice chairman. In light of CEO Sloan Davenport's erratic behavior and unauthorized use of company assets for a high-risk, unsanctioned journey, Kendrick, while she was fighting for the company's life, he had been moving in for the kill. "How fast can this thing go?" she asked, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. Owen glanced at the message, then at the fuel gauge and the storm cloud still churning behind them. "Not fast enough," he said, his voice grim. "They're not just trying to fire you, they're ambushing you. There's no way we make it back by 8, Sloan said, the color draining from her face. "Even with a tailwind, we're 3 hours out, minimum. The meeting will be over before we even touch down." Hill of one Owen's eyes flickered from the blinking red light of the emergency notification back to his navigation screen. He saw the storm front they had just escaped, a churning mass of red and yellow on the weather radar. But he also saw a narrow, unstable corridor running along its southern edge, a jet stream. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and would feel like riding a bull through a hurricane. It would also cut their travel time in half. "There's one way," he said, his voice grim. "But you're not going to like it." Sloan looked from the churning radar to the quiet resolve on his face. "I don't have to like it," she said. "I just have to survive it." He gave a sharp nod and banked the helicopter hard, heading back toward the edge of the storm. The ride was rough, the aircraft shuddering as it fought the violent air currents. But Owen's control was absolute. They were no longer running from the storm. They were using it. "He planned this," Sloan said, her voice barely audible over the engine. "All of it. The bad advice on the Tanaka deal, Gavin's son getting sick. It was all him. Kendrick." "Why?" Owen asked, his eyes never leaving the windscreen. "My job," Sloan said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "My father built this company from nothing. When he died, the board saw me as a placeholder, the daughter who inherited the crown. I've spent the last 10 years proving them wrong, proving I was more than just his legacy. Kendrick was my first hire. He was hungry, brilliant. I trusted him. He's been playing the long game, waiting for the perfect moment to make me look weak and unstable so he can step in as the calm, steady hand." She slumped in her seat. "Maybe he's right. I flew off in a storm with a man I don't know, chasing a ghost to save a deal he probably sabotaged in the first place. It is erratic. It's not erratic to fight for something you care about," Owen said quietly. The simple, direct statement hit her with surprising force. "Is that why you did it?" she asked. "Why you walked away from all this? Because you cared too much?" Owen was silent for a long time, the helicopter hurtling through the dark. "My wife, Sarah, she was an Air Force pararescue man. So was I. We met on a training mission. She was smarter, faster, and braver than anyone in our unit. We were a team in the air and on the ground." He took a slow, deep breath. "On our last deployment, we were on a rescue mission. A helicopter carrying medical supplies had gone down in a hostile valley. Simple mission. Get in, secure the assets, get out. But the intelligence was bad. The valley wasn't empty. We followed protocol to the letter. We did everything right, and it didn't matter. We lost 2 medics, and Sarah, she was hit pulling the last man onto our chopper. She died before we even cleared the ridge. The cockpit was silent save for the roar of the wind. I held her hand," Owen whispered, his voice thick with a memory that would never fade. "And I realized that all the training, all the protocols, all the skill in the world, it doesn't matter. You can do everything right and still lose. The system I dedicated my life to, the one I believed in, it couldn't protect the one person I couldn't live without. So I left. I took our daughter, Maya, and I disappeared. I took a job where the only thing at stake was a clean floor, because a clean floor never leaves a hole in your life." Sloan felt tears welling in her eyes. For him, for his wife, for the hollowed-out pain in his voice. Before she could find the words to respond, her tablet pinged. A weak signal. "It's one of the board members, an old ally of my father's," she said, her voice urgent. "He's asking for proof of Kendrick's sabotage. But I can't get a stable connection to the company server to pull the data logs. The signal is too weak to punch through the storm clutter," Owen said, his pilot brain taking over again. "Angle the tablet toward that comm satellite," he said, pointing to a specific spot in the sky. "It's a long shot, but we might be able to bounce a signal." As Sloan angled the device, Owen leaned over to get a better look at the screen. A file directory was struggling to load. Most of it was timing out, but one folder name caught his eye. K_archive_ENCR. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. "It's Kendrick's encrypted archive," Sloan said. "He told me it was for redundant backups of sensitive project files. Standard procedure." "It's not standard procedure to run a triple-layer AES encryption protocol on a backup folder," Owen said, his eyes narrowed. "And that port he's using, it's a ghost port. It's designed to be invisible to network security sweeps. That's not a backup folder, Ms. Davenport. That's a digital dead drop. He's been running a shadow network inside your own system." Sloan stared at him. "Can you prove it?" "Not from here," Owen said. "But I know what it looks like. We've found the weapon. We just need to find the bullets." The sun was just beginning to stain the eastern horizon, a pale bruised purple as the city skyline came into view. They were going to make it back in time. But time wasn't the problem anymore. "It doesn't matter," Sloan said, the fight draining out of her. "We'll walk into that boardroom. I'll accuse him. He'll deny it. And the board will see a desperate, paranoid CEO making wild accusations. He's got them completely snowed. We have no proof Owen's gaze was fixed on the Davenport Tower, the tallest building in the city, its helipad waiting for them. The soldier, the strategist who had lain dormant for 8 years, was now wide awake. "You're right," he said, his voice now cold and sharp as forged steel. "The boardroom isn't the battlefield. It's the target. We're not going to walk in there and defend ourselves. We're going on the attack." The helicopter's skids touched down on the helipad with less than 10 minutes to spare before the 8 a.m. meeting. The moment the rotors spun down, Owen was unstrapped and moving. He was no longer the janitor, the pilot, or the grieving widower. He was the soldier he had been trained to be, and Sloan's corporate tower was his new battlefield. "They're expecting you to be defensive," he said, his voice clipped and precise as he helped Sloan out of the cockpit. "They're expecting you to walk in there, cornered and emotional. You're going to give them exactly what they want." Sloan stared at him, bewildered. "I'm going to go in there and lose?" "That's your plan. You're going to go in there and stall," he corrected. "Argue, get angry, question their numbers, accuse Kendrick of being ambitious, do whatever you have to do to keep them all in that room, focused on you. You're the bait. Can you do that?" Sloan's back straightened. A flicker of her old, formidable self returned. "I can do that." "Good," Owen said. "While you're keeping them busy, I need 2 things from you. Your master keycard and your admin-level network password. I need unrestricted access to the building and the system." Without hesitation, she pulled the keycard from her neck and handed it to him, reciting a complex 16-digit alphanumeric password from memory. There was no fear in her eyes. Only absolute trust. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Kendrick built himself a hiding place in your network," Owen said, his eyes already scanning the building's layout. "I'm going to make him burn it down himself." He turned and disappeared down the rooftop stairwell just as the boardroom doors opened to admit the somber-faced board members. Sloan took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed her jacket, and walked into her own ambush. The atmosphere in the room was arctic. Kendrick sat to the right of the vice chairman, looking the part of the concerned, reluctant heir apparent. Sloan, the vice chairman, a stern man named Arthur, began without preamble. "We've called this meeting due to a series of deeply troubling events. Your handling of the Tanaka deal has been, to put it mildly, a disaster. And now we have this unauthorized excursion. It suggests an instability in your leadership. Kendrick presented his case with practiced perfection. He displayed emails Sloan had supposedly ignored, profit projections that were subtly doctored to look catastrophic, and the flight logs from her rogue trip. "I am as loyal to Sloan as anyone," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "But my first loyalty must be to this company. And I am worried. Her behavior has become erratic. I fear she is no longer fit to lead." Sloan fought back, just as Owen had instructed. She tore into Kendrick's numbers. She questioned his timeline. She accused him of being a backstabbing opportunist. It was a spectacular display of defiance, and it was buying Owen precious time. 2 floors below, Owen slid Sloan's keycard through the server room's security scanner. The light flashed green. He slipped inside the cold, humming heart of the company. He found an open terminal, and his fingers began to fly across the keyboard, the muscle memory of a forgotten lifetime coming back to him. In a flood. He wasn't trying to break Kendrick's triple-layer encryption. He didn't have the time. He was going after the ghost port itself. He located the hidden pathway and wrote a simple, malicious script. It was designed to create a recursive loop, rerouting a sliver of all outgoing network traffic back through Kendrick's hidden archive. It was a digital bottleneck. In minutes, the entire system would grind to a halt, and every diagnostic would point to the encrypted folder as the source of the chaos. Back in the boardroom, Sloan was mid-sentence when the main presentation screen behind her flickered and went red. A massive alert box appeared. Network integrity failure. Critical. Every laptop and tablet in the room flashed the same warning. Alarms began to chime. "What in God's name is happening?" Arthur demanded, rising from his seat. Kendrick stared at the screen, his smug confidence instantly vanishing. A secondary alert appeared, this one containing a line of diagnostic code. "Source of instability, partition K_archive_ENCR. Kendrick's blood ran cold. It was his archive. His private, hidden folder. How could they have found it? Panic seized him. If I'd performed a deep diagnostic on that partition to fix the crash, they would find everything. The stolen data, the correspondence with their rivals, the entire blueprint of his betrayal. I can fix this," Kendrick stammered, jumping to his feet. "It must be a server malfunction. I can isolate it from my office terminal." He bolted from the room, leaving a stunned board behind. In the server room, Owen watched the network traffic monitor. He saw Kendrick's unique login splash across the screen from his office PC. He saw the frantic sequence of commands. Then, the one he was waiting for appeared. Initiate command. Purge partition, archive, anchor true. Kendrick was wiping it. He was trying to destroy the evidence. Owen didn't stop the command. He let it run, but as it executed, he initiated his own program, a packet sniffer that recorded every keystroke, every command, every byte of data transmitted from Kendrick's terminal. He captured it all, Kendrick's login credentials, the timestamp showing it was during a critical network failure, and the explicit, irreversible command to permanently destroy a hidden folder of company data, a folder whose existence was a fireable offense, and whose destruction during a crisis was a federal crime. The purge completed. The system alarm stopped. The network stabilized as the bottleneck vanished. Owen saved the recording to a secure file, a grim, triumphant look on his face. The boardroom debate didn't matter anymore. He didn't have a theory. He didn't have a suspicion. He had proof. Kendrick strode back into the boardroom, dabbing a handkerchief on his brow. He projected an air of weary triumph. "My apologies for the alarm," he announced, his voice smooth once more. "It appears a corrupted data packet from an older server was creating a network loop. I've isolated and purged the anomaly. Everything is stable now." He shot a condescending look at Sloan. "As I was saying, we need steady leadership. Someone who can handle a crisis without flying off the handle." Arthur, the vice chairman, nodded grimly. "Thank you for your quick action, Kendrick. Now, if there is no further discussion, I believe it's time to vote." He was raising his hand to call the question when the boardroom doors swung open. Owen Grant walked in. He wasn't wearing his janitor's uniform. He was just a man in a worn leather jacket, but he moved with a quiet authority that commanded the attention of every person in the room. He walked past the stunned board members, his eyes locked on Kendrick. Kendrick's face went white with shock and disbelief. Owen stopped at the head of the table and placed the tablet in front of Arthur. "The corrupted data packet has a name," Owen said, his voice calm and even. He tapped the screen. "And a confession." He played the recording. The massive screen at the end of the boardroom, which moments before had been displaying Kendrick's doctored reports, now showed a stark, undeniable truth. The board watched in silent, horrified fascination. They saw Kendrick Shaw's unique login credentials appear on screen. They saw the timestamp, confirming he was logged in from his office while he was supposed to be in this very meeting. And they saw the command line, stark and damning. "Purge partition. Key archive anchor true." "As you can see," Sloan said, her voice cutting through the silence like glass, "while the board was in session, Mr. Shaw accessed a hidden, unauthorized archive on the company's servers and permanently deleted it." She paused, letting the weight of her next words land. That archive, which he just illegally destroyed, contained all of his correspondence with our rivals at Tanaka Corporation. It was the complete record of his corporate espionage. The color drained from Kendrick's face. He was trapped. "That's a lie!" he shrieked, his voice cracking, his composure shattering into a million pieces. "He's a hacker!" She brought in a hacker. "This man is a janitor. He doctored that footage. It's a fabrication." He pointed a trembling finger at Owen. "He's a nobody. You can't possibly believe this. This grease monkey over me." His hysterical outburst did more to confirm his guilt than any evidence could have. The room was silent, save for his ragged breathing. Arthur, the vice chairman, looked from Kendrick's wild, panicked eyes to Owen's stoic calm. His face was like stone. "Security," he said into the room's intercom. "To the main boardroom." Now 2 uniformed guards entered the room. Kendrick looked wildly around, but there were no friendly faces, no allies left. He had been so certain of his victory, he had never once considered the quiet man who cleaned the floors. As the guards escorted him out, his final, desperate shouts echoed down the hall. "She's the one who's unstable. You're all making a huge mistake." Then he was gone. Arthur turned to Sloan. The cold judgment in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of profound and humbled respect. "Sloan," he said, his voice hoarse, "on behalf of this board, I offer you our deepest, most sincere apologies. We were wrong." "Thank you, Arthur," Sloan said simply. The vice chairman then looked at Owen, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal. "And you, Mr. Grant, is it? We owe you a debt of gratitude that I'm not sure this company can ever truly repay." "I was just taking out the trash," Owen replied, his expression unreadable. After the other board members had filed out, offering their own quiet apologies to Sloan, she and Owen were left alone in the vast, silent room. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The crisis was over. They had won. Sloan looked at him, really looked at him, not as a pilot or a soldier or a janitor, but as the man who had walked through the fire with her. "So," she said, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. "What now, contractor?" Owen allowed the ghost of a smile to touch his own face. It was the first one she had ever really seen. "I think my contract is terminated, ma'am." "Sloan," she corrected him softly. "My name is Sloan." "Owen," he replied. The titles and barriers that had separated them were gone, burned away in the chaos of the last 24 hours. All that was left were 2 people, standing in the quiet aftermath of a battle they had won together, with the unspoken question of what came next hanging between them. A week after the boardroom showdown, a quiet hum of efficiency had returned to Davenport Industries, but it was a different kind of quiet. The fear was gone, replaced by a current of hushed, excited gossip. The story of the janitor who saved the company had spread like wildfire, morphing into a modern-day legend. Kendrick was gone, facing a mountain of federal charges, and the Tanaka deal, now being renegotiated on fair terms, was a testament to Sloan's renewed, decisive leadership. But for Sloan, the victory felt hollow. Owen Grant had vanished. He had submitted his resignation via a brief professional email the day after the meeting. His final paycheck was never picked up. He hadn't answered the single text she'd sent, a simple, "Are you okay?" He had honored his side of the bargain to the letter. The contract was terminated. They were strangers again, and his absence had left a glaring, inexplicable hole in her world. She found herself looking for him in the hallways, listening for the squeak of his cart. The building, her building, felt sterile again. A place of glass and steel without a soul. She had won back her company, but she'd lost the one person who had made her feel like a part of it. Finally, she understood. The problem wasn't just Kendrick. The problem was a culture she had created, a place so focused on the view from the top that it had forgotten the foundation it was built on. She called a company-wide town hall. Standing before her thousands of employees, she wasn't the ruthless, detached CEO they were used to. Her voice was different, softer, stronger. "For the last 10 years, I've measured the success of this company by its stock price and its market share," she began. "I was wrong. A company is not its balance sheet. A company is its people." She told them about a man who worked for them, a man with extraordinary skills who pushed a broom because no one had ever bothered to look past his uniform. "How many more of you are there?" she asked, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "How many artists, engineers, pilots, and poets are in this room right now? Your talent's hidden because we never thought to ask. That ends today." She announced the creation of a new division, the Department of Human Potential. Its sole purpose was to find and nurture the skills of every employee, to provide education, training, and opportunities for advancement. It was a promise that at Davenport Industries, no one would ever be invisible again. There was only one person in the world who could run it. She found him on a Saturday, in a small park a dozen blocks from his apartment. He was on his knees in a sandbox, helping Maya put the finishing touches on an elaborate sandcastle. He looked up as she approached, his expression guarded. "Miss Davenport," he said, his voice flat. "Sloan," she corrected softly. "You're a hard man to find, Owen." "I'm not trying to be found." "I know," she said, "but I need your help." She told him about the new department, about her vision for a company that valued its people above all else. She offered him the job to lead it. He stood up, brushing the sand from his jeans, and shook his head. "I'm not a manager, Sloan." "I'm nobody, you're not nobody," she said, her voice fierce. "You're the man who saved this company. You're the man who sees what other people miss. You told me your old job got people killed. I'm offering you a new mission, Owen, a job that brings people to life." He was still shaking his head, the fear of that old world pulling at him. But then Maya, who had been listening with rapt attention, tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, her voice full of simple, unshakable logic. "You fixed the helicopter, and you fixed the sad lady's company. You're good at fixing things." Owen looked down at his daughter's bright, trusting face, and then at Sloan, who was watching them with an expression of raw, unguarded hope. He realized Maya was right. Maybe a mission didn't have to involve a flight suit and an enemy. Maybe, sometimes, a mission was about building things up instead of tearing them down. A slow smile, the first truly relaxed smile she had ever seen from him, spread across his face. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I'll do it." 6 months later, the rooftop of the Davenport Tower was quiet. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and violet. Owen stood by the railing, No longer a janitor, but the director of human potential. His department had become the company's most celebrated success, having already promoted a dozen employees from within, including a former mailroom clerk who was now a rising star in the graphic design department. Sloane came to stand beside him. Maya was with them, her hand holding one of each of theirs. They were a comfortable, familiar trio now. "It's beautiful up here," Sloane said softly. "It is," Owen agreed. "You know," she said, a playful light in her eyes, "after all this, I think I still owe you something." He looked at her, confused. "You don't owe me anything, Sloane." "I think I do," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I'm pretty sure I said if you could fly this helicopter, I'd marry you." Owen laughed, a real, deep laugh that echoed across the rooftop. He squeezed her hand, his eyes meeting hers. The bet, which had started as an arrogant joke, had somehow, against all odds, become a promise. And as they stood there, watching the city lights begin to twinkle on below, they both knew it was a promise they intended to keep, because in the end, they had both been rescued. The pilot who had forgotten how to fly, and the CEO who had forgotten how to live, had found in each other the one thing they'd both been missing: a safe place to land. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this story from? Drop a comment and let us know, because your presence here means more than you know. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that everyone has a hidden talent waiting to be discovered, please consider subscribing. There are so many more stories waiting to be told. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and remember to look past the uniform. You never know who you might find.